we have a clip here of a friend of the show, and I'm doing that in the shitty way to be person we think sucks. Ben Shapiro, um, taking taking his shot at doing a little reasoning about the subject that Ryan wrote his dissertation about, which is free will and determinism.
One area where we disagree on, you can see with my wristband here that we do agree on a lot, but one area where we do disagree on is religion, and particularly your justification for the veracity of religion and for the existence of God. And so in a lot of these discussions with Joe Rogan, with Dave Rubin, you talk about free will as your justification for the existence of God, that free will is something incorporeal, and it's hard to explain the existence of free will, so we need a God to justify that sort of thing as sort of an underlying principle for prosperous civilizations. Is that kind of an accurate sum of your
75%, right?
Yes, okay. Sounds good. 75% with you is pretty good.
I mean, it's hard to sum up a broader view.
Yes, a very broad view of that. But I have a more biologically determinate view of free will. Observationally speaking, I think that we can determine different organisms' free will based on the cognitive capacity that they have. So for example, a bacterium is going to have less free will than a lizard is going to have less free will than a chimpanzee, and then going all the way up to humans who have less free will. And we can also determine different areas of our bodies, specifically our brains, that are going to determine the capacity for reasoning and the capacity to make rational decisions. People with damage to their prefrontal cortex are going to make more impulsive decisions. So with that very observationally sound view of free will and sort of a biologically deterministic, from a biologically deterministic standpoint, is religion going to be the only justification for the existence of God and the existence of free will?
There are certain things that cannot be observed. For example, the mind-body duality that exists is something that's not observationally possible. We're never going to be able to lock down exactly why that exists, I think. Why it is that we feel that we have the capacity for choice, for example. And when you talk about the limitations on free will, I would fully agree with that, obviously. I mean, somebody who's been hit in the head with a hammer is going to have less free will than somebody who's not. You have less free will when you're asleep than when you're awake. Yeah. Obviously, there is a connection between your capacity for free will and your brain function. But I would press you a little bit, and can we have an exchange here? What
Absolutely.
I press you a little bit on is what you mean when you say biologically determined free will. So why do you what do you believe free will is? Like, do you believe that I have the capacity to choose otherwise? In other words, in a given circumstance, I could have chosen to do something else, or based on biology and environment alone, if we had all the information, we fed it all into a giant computer, right? Then I could, with 100% accuracy, determine what exactly what decision you're going to make. You do not actually have a choice. In other words, free will doesn't exist. Sam Harris is consistent on this.
Yes.
Sam Harris says everything is material, everything that's measurable is material, and therefore free will doesn't exist. So we don't have a choice about how this conversation is going right now. It's going to end with everybody applauding and you walking away, right? That's how.
So, for a second there, I was going to give Ben Shapiro a point because he did actually usefully clarify something, for at one point, right, which was to say, okay, I hear words like deterministic, being thrown around here. Like, are you actually talking about literal causal determinism? And then he gave like a perfectly serviceable explanation of what that would be, but then he pivoted immediately from there into saying, so obviously, if you believe that, you must not believe in free will.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot here. So first, I want to give props to the person asking the question. He seems to have a pretty reasonable kind of compatibilist understanding of what free will is. So he wants to, in a kind of Daniel Dennett-ish kind of way, like define freedom in terms of natural capacities that entities could have more or less of. And so it makes sense to talk about people being more free because we of the kinds of things we can understand, the kinds of things we can reason about, the kinds of decisions we can make. So I appreciated that he was doing that. And then, so like you said, so it's clear that Ben Shapiro is going to have an incompatibilist view of free will. And so his definition of free will, he wants to have it defined in terms of alternate possibilities, and that's fine. That's a common definition of free will in the literature. But then, like you say, it's like there's the instant move from this is what free will means to therefore you can't believe in it and also believe in science at the same time, or believe in biological determinism at the same time, which is a contentious position, right? I mean, there are a whole bunch of compatibilists who are happy to accept that definition of free will, and then they have very sophisticated accounts of how we could reconcile that kind of free will with a physically deterministic or materialistic universe.
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, when you say that something could or couldn't be otherwise, like, I mean, I think that outside of the context of arguing about free will and determinism, what we seem to mean by could and couldn't usually when we talk about alternate scenarios, whether something could be otherwise, could be different than it is that there's some like interested, important, relevant set of facts about that thing, and we're asking whether something else happening than what did happen would be consistent with all of those facts, right? So if if you have I don't know, I mean, if you're shooting hoops in your backyard and you miss one, then when somebody says, well, you could have gotten it, right? Like they don't mean literally.
They don't mean literally like holding every physical condition the same. They mean, right, someone like you with your abilities and your talents and your skill with basketball in similar circumstances, there's a good chance you'd make that shot if you try it again.
Right, exactly. Right. That they have, because if it's like, molecule by molecule, every single physical fact about, the angle at which you're shooting, and the the air around it, and exactly how much pressure applied, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you held all that constant, then no, you could not have made the shot. But everybody understands what we mean when we say that you could have made the shot. And
that's right.
Yeah. And if the hoop was raised like 1,000 feet, then we would say, no, you could not have made the shot, because there's no interested set of facts about how, about the starting circumstances that would be consistent with you doing it.
That's right. And that would come down to just the kind of thing that kid was talking about, like just given your human biology and what a human being is, how far a human being is physically capable of throwing a basketball. Yeah, in that case, we would just say, no, that's not a thing that you could do. But so that's right. So that's the kind of thing compatibilists will point to, is that there is an ordinary language, everyday understanding of could have done otherwise, that does not require us to hold all of the facts that we when we speak that way, we do abstract away from some of the facts. And so even if determinism is true, that ordinary understanding of could have done otherwise could still survive. And then the debate is, well, is that sense of could have done otherwise the one that matters for free will and moral responsibility and all that stuff? And you can have a conversation about that, and there are reasonable people who will reject that. But he's just, I mean, in spite of being the cool kid's philosopher, he's just glossing over this whole discourse and just assuming that once you grant the could have done otherwise definition of free will, that it's automatically incompatible with determinism or materialism or science, I guess.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. And of course, all that is granted the could have done otherwise definition, which is itself super controversial.
Yes.
But there are right there there are like Frankfurt examples, for example, that lead some people to think that that's actually not the right way to think about the kind of free will that matters for whether we're morally responsible for our actions. But what I find most interested about this is that the cool kid's philosopher is citing another great philosopher, Sam Harris, because Sam Harris is dismissive of the idea that you could that you could reconcile free will and determinism, and Shapiro is doing this weird thing where he says, well, see, Sam Harris is consistent, meaning like, well, I understand Sam's position and I haven't bothered to look into anything else. So like, it's probably, these are the options that you agree with Sam that there's no such thing as free will, or you agree with me that there is such a thing as free will and it's magical and undetectable. And we can only make sense of it by reference to God.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it isn't. Yeah, I would say Sam and Ben Shapiro, in spite of their deeply different worldviews, I think they are working with literally the exact same understanding of what free will means. Free will means something magic and non-physical. And Sam Harris says, well, we can't have something magic and non-physical. And Ben says, obviously we have free will, so therefore
we do have something. Yeah. No, exactly. All right, let's keep watching.
Yeah.
That is how it is going to be.
So what's your definition of free will?
I think free will is the capacity to make choice and the capacity to take things from your perceptions and to act on that sort of thing.
Okay,
and I think it's very.
So choose otherwise free choice is something that you are for. You think?
Yes, but I think it is very closely tied to scientific evidence about, the observation of how free will works in our brains. Like I said, it's very closely tied to our perception. I cannot choose to catch a bullet. I can't choose to see radio waves. It's tied to our biological necessities.
Okay, but here's the point. If you're a pure materialist, in other words, you have to acknowledge that there is something beyond the purely material that allows us to have the capacity to choose, because otherwise it would be measurable, right? There's nothing measurable that allows us the capacity to choose. Now, I'm not saying that justifies Judeo-Christian religion. I'm saying that justifies something beyond scientific observation.
I don't think it particularly justifies something beyond scientific observation, because we can view through like fMRI imaging in the brain, which parts of the brain are more active whenever higher decision making is happening.
I'm not saying that biology is disconnected from free will.
Yes.
What I am saying is that you do have a limited capacity in whatever circumstance you are as a human being to choose otherwise, to the extent that you are not brain damaged, for example.
That is true.
And as long as your brain is functioning, you have that capacity. That is not something that can be justified by science itself. Meaning that the capacity to choose otherwise has to be explained by a cause, right?
Yes.
What is the cause that is justifying that? If it's brain function, then you're just a materialist and you actually don't believe in free will.
In terms of
there's a lot going on there. So, I mean, again, the questioner is actually doing a pretty admirable job. So he's pushing back, when Ben says that there's nothing observable that could account for choice, which I really don't understand what he means by that. There is, as the guy points out, I mean, there is a lot of psychological and neurological and physiological study of choice and things that can influence choice, and even attempts to like map people's brains in fMRI machines, which he's probably referring to, and predict simple choices that people are going to make. And so I don't know. I don't know why he would say there's nothing observable that could account for choice.
Honestly, what that part reminded me of more than anything was there's a debate I did. When was that? It was like late last year with Stuart Knechtel, who said, I think I'm getting this right, that the fact that like ink on paper conveys information shows that there must be a God, because I'm actually not sure how to finish that sentence, but definitely that first part is something is something that he was saying. I've been saying that you can't like physically explain choice or explain choice with anything observable seems a lot like that, right? I mean, like is literally the claim that there's nothing about like physical brains that can that can explain why it is that people make the choices that they make. That seems like a really weird claim, right? Like, or is that just a sort of weird way of saying that you can't any purely physical explanation wouldn't explain why it was a free choice, because free choice means that there's this like magical violation of laws of physical necessity going on.
I guess that must be what he means, yeah. And then you're just begging the question, like, why is why is that the definition of free will that matters for the things that we care about? Yeah, it's strange.
Yeah, I just
I guess also
yeah.
like even if you so I mean even if you wanted to assume with him that we have to be indeterminists and that so that free will really does require the ability to do otherwise, holding all of the facts constant, so like holding every physical fact in the universe constant. So he seems to think if you have that definition of free will, there's no way you could be a materialist. But it's also just worth mentioning there are a whole bunch of materialist libertarians about free will too. So there are people like Robert Kane
Mm-hmm.
is the most well known. There are a few other contemporary philosophers defending similar accounts, and they argue that just given this hinges on us the right interpretation of quantum mechanics turning out to be true, but if it turns out that quantum mechanics is indeterministic, then they give accounts of how we might work that indeterminism into the decision-making process that would make our decisions really undetermined. It make it really possible, holding all the facts constant, that you could have done otherwise, and still have the choice be a result of your character and reasoning, etc. So he's also just glossing over the fact that there is a whole literature of people defending the view that we can have exactly the kind of free will he's talking about without appealing to anything non-physical or divine or anything else.
Yeah, or I mean, maybe to put an even sharper point on it, if it's not the kind of free will that he's talking about, like that would be really useful to clarify, because then like what's the difference, right? Like what's
Yeah.
the thing that it lacks? Because if you have
Yeah.
like the Robert Kane view that whatever, the brain is a quantum computer, so you have that at least at certain points there are like, for certain kinds of decision making, it's possible that you'd sometimes have these moments of where you're where like your normal processes of decision making are deadlocked, and there would be just quantum indeterminacy would have a chance to make a difference one way or the other, and that then and so then you're reasoning about what to do. The outcome of that reasoning isn't determined by the starting conditions, the laws of physics. And if, as I kind of suspect, right, given his view, like if Shapiro then wanted to say, well, no, that wouldn't count as free will either, right? Then that would be a good time to say, okay, well, spell out for me, the thing you think is missing here, because I suspect. Like I expect a lot of people actually find views like that unsatisfying, because it doesn't quite scratch the incompatibilist itch about this. Because say, well, all right, if I start thinking too hard about things being, about deterministic chains of cause and effect, then that doesn't seem free willy to me. And but also, if I start thinking too hard about chains of cause and effect that have elements of randomness to them, that doesn't seem free willy either. And
Sure.
at which point you could just say, well, whatever, there's no such thing either way, a perfectly respectable position. Or like it could become really, really clear that you're just God in the gaps in it, right? That like if you don't actually have to spell out a mechanism that you're thinking about, then since it's not spelled out, nothing about it is like activated. Then no, that doesn't quite sound like what I want either.
Yeah. But if he can't articulate that, then using this as an argument for God becomes a lot weaker, because he starts with like, I mean, I think at least the move he seems to be wanting to make is, here's this understanding of free will, you agree with it, and you can't reconcile this understanding of free will with materialism or whatever. But as you start making the concept of free will something more and more abstract, and that isn't even satisfied, even if we have the genuine ability to do otherwise that he started out with, then it's not clear what he's saying you can't make sense of given materialism. Then what is the thing that we can't have if I have a materialistic worldview?
Yeah, which again is also a really interesting question, because it does seem like he's equating materialism and determinism here.
He is doing that. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, just quite obviously, a live option on the table is that materialism is true and determinism is false. Like that's
Yeah,
a
you could
coherent position that a lot of people hold.
Could be nothing but material reality, but could be
Yeah.
that the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics is true. So material reality is not entirely deterministic.
Mhm.
At the very least, if you want to, that seems like that seems like an empirical question whether that's true, not just something that's like conceptually,
Yeah.
we're gonna rule out. And yeah, if it's, but like once you have made that clear, it's like, okay, so if there's something about materialism that's not just determinism that's incompatible with it, then that does again start to feel very, very God in the galaxy. Like not maybe that's the wrong way to put it, but I mean it does start to feel like that if you put a lot of words that we sort of have a feeling of hush reverence about on top of just a complete lack of any explanation of how it works, that works emotionally in ways that it might not if you tried to spell it out. But anyway, my suspicion, possibly unfair.
Yeah.
Brain function, I do think that our brains act on a continuum in terms of how they grapple with free will and grapple with these choices. So, you had said that if you were hit with a hammer, you would have less free will than someone whose head wasn't hit with a hammer.
Right.
I think if the negative is true, then that definitely can show us that the positive can also be true as well. Animals with more distinct brains.
But here's the problem. You're operating in my universe where you do have the capacity to choose otherwise. And what I'm saying is I don't think that science can actually justify pure scientific materialism. I don't think can actually justify the capacity to choose otherwise. Like Sam Harris's definition of free will is you don't have any external pressures acting on you, but you're always foreordained to have done X, Y, or Z.
Okay.
You're operating in my world where you do, regardless of what the external pressures are, and regardless of your biology or environment, you do have the capacity. I can pick up my watch right now or not pick up my watch right now. That's my choice, for example. And you have the capacity to determine whether you get married or whether you don't. That's something you get to choose. And we couldn't just feed it into a computer and get you. Right. And what that suggests is that there is a spiritual world that lives beyond what is scientifically measurable.
Yes. Well, the only difference between you and I is I think that spiritual world or that incorporeal world is what exists within our brain, and something immaterial can exist within our brain.
It emerges from our brain. And what
exactly, from consciousness.
Right. And
he's doing so good.
Emerges from the brain. What I'm saying is that if you believe that consciousness emerges from the brain, a material object cannot actually create the capacity to choose beyond the material object.
So what do you think is beyond the material object then? That future in terms of what,
I mean, this is where I say that there is such a thing as a godly capacity that has been given to us.
Yes,
that
and that's
separates
where
us
we
from
disagree
animals,
as well.
This is where religion comes in.
Yeah, exactly.
So
we're going to have to agree to disagree on this one. But thank you.
I don't know why. That's a terrible moment to agree to disagree. Just like say tell me more about the godly capacity.
Yeah, it's a very big claim. It's a shame that he was apparently willing to just accept some kind of radical emergentism that the brain generates something immaterial or something ghostly. I don't know.
I mean, honestly, like when the whole clip first started, the students seemed, it's like, okay, this is going to be weird and whatever. And then it's like, no, wait a second, everything he's saying is like pretty well defined and internally consistent, and like I know what he means. And then
he seems like someone who might have read Dennett's like Elbow Room or something. Like he's clearly engaged with this literature a little bit.
And then at the end he made that weird concession about consciousness being spooky and non-physical, which he absolutely did not need to make. He should not have made. He should have just said like, well, I don't think that conscious decision making is spooky. I just think this is a material process.
Yeah.
And then when Ben went into the godly capacity, ask him how the godly capacity works. I want more information about the godly capacity.
Yeah, and I just want to know how, especially when his examples are so mundane. It's like I can pick up this watch or not pick up this watch. And it's like, again, like there's nothing that mysterious about that kind of choice. You don't really need, and even if you want the incompatibilist view of free will, that could be a random thing in the brain. It could be really undetermined, and it could really be possible, given your character and yourself at that moment, that things, and holding all of that constant, that things could go either way. That doesn't seem like a very godly capacity, the ability to either pick up a watch or not pick up a watch. That just seems like a pretty mundane capacity.
Yeah, it's such a weird thing too, because it's like, okay, like let's assume the existence of God, let's assume all that stuff. Like, why should we just believe that God has given us this capacity without giving us the capacity to understand or complain, explain it, or like point to some sort of concrete evidence of it? I mean, like that. This is such a weird, like, just the format of the claim is so weird that it's like, because why is it, again, I understand saying like, okay, intuitively we seem to have free will. Here's a way of explaining it in terms of things we can understand and point to, and that makes perfect sense to me. But then saying like, there's absolutely no way of explaining it, it's totally mysterious, but like that, this really seems to undermine like, what's the original reason for thinking that you have it?
Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
Like I don't get.
The motive. Yeah, I guess the motive for appealing to those kinds of examples is you want it to be something, because I guess the force of the argument is like, well, you believe we have free will, right? Obviously, like you could pick up the watch or not. So you need those mundane examples for it to be something we all believe in. And so you say, well, you believe in this, therefore you have to believe in God. But to make the move to God, free will needs to be something much more mysterious, and like literally he calls it a godly capacity. And then, yeah, like you say, well, then what's the reason? Give me the examples, show me the things, the kinds of choices we can't explain biologically or neurologically or psychologically, that motivate that make it so the only inference we can possibly make is that God is real.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, I will have you know, I did not get kicked out of the house for not having Jen on the fly this segment. Our water heater is leaking, and there's various things that are going on that are related to that in there. It's very noisy, so I'm sitting out on the porch. It's Georgia. It's, you can do that here. But yeah, no, it is like, I mean, even just taking that you pick up the watch, you don't pick up the watch. Like, it just seems like, what's this sense in which you think that we can do one and we can't do another? Like, because it seems like if all you can say about it is that it's a godly capacity, that makes me suspect you can't actually say what you mean by that. And if you can't say what you mean by that, what's the reason for thinking that there's some sense that there is some sense of you can do one, you can do the other, that's not just like some mundane, like, I mean, you're obviously right. It's not even an interesting example, because it seems like any of the things that are like complicated and interesting that might be part of a reasonable conception of free will, that you like, I don't know, that you're like reflecting on your desires or preferences, or that you're like weighing reasons or anything like that. Like, none of that even seems to have anything to do with what we mean by you can pick up the watch, you can't pick up the watch. Like that one,
yeah,
that one just seems like totally like mundane. Like, you pick up the watch because you want to. If you didn't want to, you wouldn't do it.
Exactly. Yeah. And in principle, we could put you in an fMRI and map out the part of your brain that is correspondent with the desire to pick up the watch. And if anyone wanted to waste their time on that, I think that's within our current technology.
Yeah, I would think so, right? Like, I mean, I suppose you could construct some kind of example where you're like really like you could have like an interesting free will example, not picking up a watch. It's the it's the watch from Pulp Fiction, and like you're struggling about whether you want to you want to pick it up or whatever. But like if you just mean literally you can pick up the watch, like that just seems like that doesn't seem like like that seems much more like I could have made that shot than than it does like a could that would be interested and say something about free will or moral responsibility or anything like that. So I don't know. I'm not I am not convinced that Ben Shapiro is actually good at philosophy. So I'm just gonna leave it there.
I will say this did not convince me. I would like to know more. Wonder if he's written about this. The student reference that he has talked about it on like Sam Harris and Joe Rogan shows and whatever. But I'm wondering if Shapiro's like actually written this argument out. Another question that was just kind of occurred to me, it probably doesn't really matter because I doubt Shapiro's actually thought it through carefully enough to have an answer. But I wonder if this is meant to be like more of an argument from experience, like it feels like we have free will. And so that's evidence that we have this godly capacity that could only be explained in non-material terms. Or is it like a transcendental argument that we have to presuppose that we have the godly free will in order to make sense of our more, like, is it more of a Kantian thing? Like when you have to presuppose it.
I mean, the second one would be a much better argument. I was assuming it was the first one, which is why.
I mean, what he was saying felt much more like the first argument, but
which is kind of what I was getting at. Like, it's like, okay, so wait a second. If this is something totally ineffable and inexplicable, and there's you couldn't explain
where in your experience is the evidence for that.
So you feel like you have an ineffable, inexplicable, like totally, transcendent, incomprehensible kind of free will. Is that what it feels like? Really? Like, I mean, and actually, this is in the chat. Somebody asks, I think, a very good question, which, this is our good friend Silver Harlow says. You could choose to pick up. Watch. No, sorry, that's not the one I was looking at. It was. There's a question. Here we go. Yeah. Secret Agent Dan is an implication of Shapiro's position that animals either have no free will or that they have souls like humans. It seems like yes. Also, though, like let's pause on animals for a second because, and in fact, I don't think it's even just the disjunction. I think he explicitly embraced the first fork of the disjunction in what he said, that animals have no free will. He said it's a godly capacity that separates us from animals. But wait a second, let's talk about the damn watch again. Because, like, I mean, my dog will walk over to where her toy is, like be like uncertain for a second about whether to pick it up, and then either pick it up or not, right? Or like pick it up and put it down and pick up a different one, right? I mean, that on the face of it, that doesn't seem different than a human being.
It doesn't seem deeply different. Yeah. I mean, when I call my cat's name, I can see it on her face. Like she's delivering, like, do I acknowledge this or do I just keep walking? And like, it's about half and half. Sometimes she'll come over when I call her name. Sometimes she'll just be like, but she'll pause and deliberate for a moment. And it seems like when she chooses to walk, it feels like, well, you could have chosen to come over here. You little ass, like get over here. Like,
no, exactly. Like it doesn't, like, it just seems like, like whatever you want to say about the watch, you should be able to say about like, she, picked up her ball instead of her squeaky toy, but she could have picked up the squeaky toy, like that doesn't seem fundamentally different because we haven't even built anything into the example about like reasoning or deliberation or anything like that, right? Which like would be at least, maybe once you started talking about stuff like that, I mean, I suspect that, I mean, I basically think the questioner is right. I mean, I think all of those things come on a spectrum, and like they aren't going to be totally
Exactly.
absent from the dog and the cat. But like
No.
but like since we haven't even talked about anything like that, there's nothing, there's absolutely nothing about that description that the dog and the cat wouldn't have. And it's also, yeah, I remember Harry Frankfurt making this point about animals, one of his papers, that it's like, okay, if one of the things that you want from the account of free will is separated, is that you want to say something about human decision making that wouldn't apply to non-human animals. Just saying there's like a physical miracle in the brain when you make a decision. It's like, well, I don't know, but I don't have any evidence that happens for humans. So, I mean, that could happen for my dog too. I have no idea. Like the state of the evidence is exactly as good for both of those.
Exactly. Yeah. Or conversely, there's no evidence that anything magical is happening in my brain that's not happening in my cat's brain.
Yeah.
Like, as far as I know, like, our evidence is that, physiologically cat brains and human brains, like neurons are like very chemically similar. It's like we just have a lot more of it, but it's structurally very, very similar.
Right. I mean, this, exactly. So it's like, yeah, you could say like, if you built in enough stuff about reasoning, then like maybe that's something your cat can't do. But also, notice that we don't have to appeal to godly capacities to make sense of that. Right? We can just say that they're like cognitive tasks that you can perform, that your cat can't.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm not impressed.
There is a lot of suggestion in the chat that cats are gods, which I'm kind of on board with. So maybe.
You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.